On Christmas Eve 2021, NASA and the European Space Agency will embark on what is, in my opinion, the most risky and challenging collaborative endeavor that they have ever attempted. The James Webb Space Telescope, if all goes well, will finally take to the heavens on the 24th of December, perhaps the most appropriate day that any project like this should be launched. A day of hope for the vast majority of the world, and a day when people who are fascinated with the intricacies and the magnificence of the universe will receive their most amazing Christmas present yet. This telescope will unlock so many secrets that have yet to be discovered in the universe, both in terms of distant galaxies that came into existence only a few million years after the Big Bang, to exoplanets that are right in our interstellar neighborhood that may be home to other forms of life. James Webb will reveal so much to us and answer so many questions and resolve so many debates that have raged throughout the astronomical community for decades. Or then again, maybe it won't. You see, as all of us probably know by now, James Webb has undergone a tremendous amount of problems and challenges and cost overruns and glitches and so many other issues that have not only delayed this project for years, but have also resulted in what is nothing less than a budgetary nightmare. Every day that this project goes over budget costs the American taxpayers a minimum of $1 million. And this has resulted in a great deal of pressure on NASA from the U.S. Congress to get this project completed and to get this telescope launched or to cancel the whole damn thing. Now, obviously, we're way past a cancellation option at this point, which means, of course, that the real present that the taxpayers are getting this holiday season is $1 million a day for every day of delays. And this has resulted in an unbelievable amount of pressure on NASA to complete James Webb one way or another. And this creates, of course, a very dangerous situation. Obviously, a tremendous amount of effort has been put into this project to make sure that it does succeed. There's a great deal of redundancies built into James Webb, but at the same time, there are many frightening points of failure, and this is a project that NASA cannot afford to fail on, and yet the possibility of failure here is far larger than most people realize. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well. So it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry! When it comes to complexity and technological sophistication, virtually nothing compares to James Webb. This telescope is not only many times larger than Hubble, it's also going to have to be maintained at a constant temperature, isolated from all of the influences of the solar system. And what I mean by that is it has to be cut off from all heat sources everywhere, not only from the sun, but from any other potential source in the solar solar system, which means this thing needs a sun shield unlike anything else that we have ever constructed, and the instrument will be maintained as close to absolute zero as we can possibly keep it. And all of this is going to be done at a distance of over 1 million kilometers from Earth at a location called Lagrange Point 2 orbiting the Sun. And the reason we're putting it there is it's sort of a solar system parking lot where the instrument is unlikely to drift off course, and so therefore won't require a great deal of fuel in order to keep it in place. And given that it's going to be out there for years, you really don't want to have a limited fuel supply. Instead, you want a location where this instrument will maintain its position, and that's exactly what it's planned to do. So there are so many things that have to go right, and virtually nothing can go wrong. If anything does, it's almost impossible to foresee any kind of mission that could fix it. Now, as most of us know, James Webb has been plagued with problems almost since day one, and these problems have become so severe that in 2018, NASA set up an independent review board to track down the issues that had come up and what was causing these delays and issues and what could be done to correct them. Well, the findings were disturbing to say the least. There were a number of human-induced errors which simply come up with the project of this kind of complexity. Quote, "There have been several JWST project problems due to human-induced errors that had substantial cost and schedule impact. In one case, an improper solvent was used to clean propulsion system valves that had been stored. The error was a failure to check with the valve vendor to ensure that the solvent to be used was recommended and would not damage the valves. The valves had to be removed from the spacecraft, repaired or replaced, and reinstalled," unquote. Does that sound kind of familiar? And that was not the only problem. Quote, "Another human-induced error was improper test wiring that caused excess voltage to be applied to transducers. The error resulted from an improper interpretation of a process step. The error should have been detected by the inspector, who did not inspect, but relied on the technician's word that he had done the wiring correctly. Another seemingly small mistake that had a large impact was discovered after the acoustic test. To address a risk that fasteners for sun shield membrane covers might snag the membrane, the fastening lock nuts were tightened only to be flush with their bolts. Unfortunately, this compromised the locking mechanism, and after the test, loose hardware was found in the lower area of the spacecraft." And this was back in 2018, and quite a number of other problems have reared their ugly heads since then. And by the way, the problems that I just mentioned, which resulted, among other things, in loose screws, 70 of them that came off during that acoustic test, cost this project $600 million and an 18-month delay. And by the way, 2 of those screws from the acoustic test are still missing to this day. Quote, "The complexity and difficulty cannot be overstated. Too much optimism was built into the schedule, and no allowance has been made for additional problems." And this was a statement from Thomas Young, chairman of the review panel, during a call with reporters back in 2018. And by the way, this project back in the 1990s, when it was first conceived, was supposed to be completed for $500 million. I can only surmise that the NASA administrators who gave these cost estimates to Congress were taking extreme liberties with the truth or extreme liberties with illegal substances at the time, because this project obviously has ballooned to way beyond $8 billion. It was at $5 billion by 2011, and at the time, a House committee was voting to cancel the project. However, Maryland Senator Barbara Mikulski, I believe that's pronounced correctly, got the funding restored as long as NASA could guarantee that the project costs would not exceed $8 billion. billion. Well, so much for that, because it's way over $9 billion at this point. And that is a large part of this problem. We are trying to complete one of the most sophisticated and difficult engineering tasks in human history on a very, very low budget, really. If you compare this to some of the military development projects for some of our latest fighter jets, it's a tiny budget for something that really is far more sophisticated than any jet. As I mentioned before, James Webb has infrared equipment that needs to be protected from any outside heat sources. As a result, it has a sun shield the likes of which has never been built or even tested in practice before. It also is far larger than Hubble was, as I mentioned before, and so large that it could not fit inside any current rocket fairing. Therefore, it has to have actively segmented telescope mirrors. This is also the first time that a NASA spacecraft has been shipped to French Guiana through the Panama Canal, and the first time that NASA will be flying on an Ariane 5 rocket. And speaking of the Ariane 5, there have been numerous integration issues between the spacecraft and the Ariane's fairing and systems as this project has gone along. I'm not saying that the Ariane was a bad choice. It is, in fact, the only choice. Its 5-meter fairing, along with its tremendous amount of thrust if you add the solid rocket boosters, makes this rocket the only solution to propel something as large and as heavy as James Webb all the way out to Lagrange Point 2. An Atlas V couldn't do it, and a Falcon Heavy doesn't have a big enough fairing. Also, the Falcon Heavy is not nearly as tried and tested as the Ariane 5 is. Now, granted, Ariane 5 is not a perfect solution. It does not have a flawless mission record the way the Atlas V does, but it's still an extremely solid rocket. But still, those integration issues have been a source of concern, and these problems continue to exist up to the current time, communications issues and other things. And the most recent issue, announced just 4 days ago, involves a communications issue between the telescope itself and the Ariane 5. The fact that we're still having these kinds of integration issues between the telescope and its launch vehicle is disturbing, to say the least. And the fact of the matter is, if these issues are not completely resolved by the time it launches, then the entire mission is in serious jeopardy. But at the same time, if these problems are not resolved promptly, this project will continue to go further and further over budget, increasing the amount of pressure on NASA administrators to launch no matter what. This is very similar to the kinds of things that resulted in the Challenger tragedy back in 1986. And although human lives are not at stake this time, NASA's reputation and its future projects definitely are. If a multi-billion-dollar project like this ends up in failure, NASA will be in the hot seat, to say the least. Back in 2018, a fellow named John Thomas, who's a research scientist at MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, made a statement that kind of sums up how I feel about this project. Quote, "I'm not worried about problems they've found. I'm worried about the ones that they haven't found until launch. Testing is not a silver bullet, and I don't think it's going to be sufficient. Even if funding were not an issue, it needs rigorous and systematic examination of the system and what can go wrong," unquote. As a matter of fact, the review board back in 2018 felt only 80% confident that the launch would be successful. 80%. So something this expensive, something this ambitious, something that has this much media attention has a 20% chance of failure, and that's according to the review board from NASA that wants it to succeed very, very badly. Now, I'm not even sure if their odds are really that good, but even if they are 20%, that's still a very, very high chance of a rather cataclysmic event, at least as far as NASA's reputation is concerned, and their ability to secure funding for future projects, including Artemis. Now, fortunately, NASA is not looking at this mission through rose-colored glasses. Quite the opposite, actually. 28 minutes after liftoff, this project will go through, quote, the most complex sequence of deployments ever attempted in a single space mission. And this is according to Mike Menzel, Webb's lead mission systems engineer for NASA's Goddard Flight Space Center. So it has hundreds of points of failure, 344 to be precise. There are quite a bit of redundancies built into the instrument in order to make sure that if anything does go wrong, you're going to be able to have other ways of rectifying the problem, but still, I would say a 20% chance of failure is pretty reasonable and about as good as it could possibly get. There are so many release mechanisms that have to work perfectly. Quote, like an origami object, proper folding and unfolding is necessary in order to achieve a specific shape. And that's according to Alfonso Stewart, who is the Webb Deployment Systems lead for NASA Goddard. So many issues. But at the same time, NASA, of course, is feeling optimistic about this, or at least they're putting on a brave face for it. But given the immense amount of complexity and sophistication in the James Webb Telescope, I can't imagine that they're going to be relaxed in any way until this thing is fully deployed, functioning, and providing amazing images of the cosmos. They won't be images like Hubble, not even remotely, simply because this thing is sensitive to infrared light, but still, that will allow it to peer far further into the universe than Hubble was ever able to, and also provide us with a great deal of information about nearby exoplanets, not only their size and their mass and what stars they're orbiting, but also composition, atmospheric composition, those sorts of things that will be so important to determining just how common Earth-like planets are, or if we are indeed unique and alone in the universe. The most fundamental questions that mankind has ever had about the cosmos can be answered by this thing, which I suppose justifies its sophistication and complexity. I guess when it comes right down to it, if you're trying to answer some of the most fundamental and important questions in human history, you're not going to be able to do it on the cheap, and you're not going to be able to do it with something that isn't technologically sophisticated. And having an 80% chance of deploying an observatory that can provide us with these kinds of answers to these kinds of questions are pretty good odds, I suppose, when it comes right down to it. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to be relaxed about this, nor do I think that this project has a fantastic chance of total success. By the way, it's not going to last as long as Hubble is either. There are so many points of failure in this instrument, plus the sun shield and the need to keep it completely isolated from solar heat and solar radiation. All of these complexities are going to make it far more difficult to maintain than Hubble ever was. But still, if it's able to function for the 5 years that it's planned to function for, it will provide us with so much data that we will be analyzing it probably for the next half century, if not longer. Because of its massive aperture and also instruments that are far more advanced and able to peer further into the cosmos than anything that has been attempted in the past, something that will be able to look further back in time, almost to the very moment of the birth of the universe, able to look inside dust clouds where stars are born, able to examine planets in great detail as they pass in front of their stars, astronomical feats that no other instrument in human history have come close to accomplishing will be accomplished by the James Webb Space Telescope if it is indeed successful. So it is vital that this thing be deployed not only as promptly as possible, but also with as few questions as possible. All the redundancies need to be checked tested, retested, regardless of budget at this point. Yes, it's gone over $9 billion, but when it comes right down to it, who cares when we have this kind of scientific information, this kind of knowledge, this kind of fundamental data that will provide us with the answers to so many questions about our own history and our own destiny as far as the future of our solar system is concerned, to say nothing of nearby planets and the possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations, among so many other things. When all of this is at stake, is a few $1 billion really that important? I don't think that it is. And although I strongly feel that NASA needs to be held accountable for any cost overruns on any project, something this difficult, something this complicated needs to have certain allowances from the U.S. government. They need to understand just how difficult it is to put something like this into not our orbit, but in an unique orbit around the sun, and to observe objects and things in our universe that have never been observed before. That's not an easy task. It can't be done inexpensively, and if it takes longer and costs more, then so be it. That is far better than risking failure. If you like what I have to say, if you enjoy my rather blunt commentary on these sorts of subjects, you know how to support me. It's all in the description. I could certainly use more Patreon supporters, or just a like and subscribe, and I will be very grateful for that. So until James Webb arrives successfully at its destination, is deployed without any problems, and begins unlocking the fundamental mysteries of our universe, until that moment arrives, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.